The dust rose in swirling clouds as Hannah Rhodes lifted her hoe, the sun beating mercilessly upon her back. The townsfolk of Cottonwood Springs had their opinions about a woman working the fields, and they weren't shy about sharing them. It was 1878 in the Arizona Territory, and while women were expected to be hardy in these parts, working the soil was still considered a man's domain. "Look at her out there again," came the familiar voice of Mildred Thompson from the edge of the property. "Digging in the dirt like some common farmhand. What would her poor father think if he could see her now?" Hannah ignored the whispers, focusing instead on the rhythm of her work. Her father's death 6 months ago had left her with little choice. The small farm he'd built was all she had, and hiring help was beyond her means. 22 years old and alone in the world, she had learned quickly that pride was a luxury she could ill afford. "She's going to ruin herself out there," Mildred continued, loud enough for Hannah to hear. "No decent man will want to marry a woman with hands like a field worker and skin browned by the sun." Hannah felt the familiar heat rising to her cheeks, but kept working. The summer harvest wouldn't wait for gossip to die down. As the women passed by, their parasols tilted against the sun, Hannah drove her hoe into the earth with renewed vigor. The last potatoes needed to be dug up today if she was to make it to town in time to sell them tomorrow. The farm wasn't large, just 10 acres, but it was enough to keep her fed with a little left over to trade for necessities. "Miss Rhodes," a deep voice called from behind her. Hannah straightened, wiping sweat from her brow with her sleeve before turning. A man she didn't recognize sat atop a sturdy chestnut stallion at the edge of her field. His broad shoulders were silhouetted against the setting sun, casting his face in shadow beneath his worn leather hat. "Can I help you?" she asked, squinting up at him. He dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing himself to be tall, at least 6 feet, with a weathered face that suggested he'd spent most of his 30-odd years under the open sky. His clothes were dusty from the trail, but of good quality. "Preston Irwin," he said, extending a calloused hand. "I've just bought the Douglas place next door." Hannah hesitated before taking his hand. The Douglas ranch had been vacant for nearly a year after old man Douglas passed away. It was a good spread 500 acres with access to Pine Creek. "Hannah Rhodes," she replied, aware of how disheveled she must look. "Welcome to Cottonwood Springs, Mr. Irwin." His blue eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "I've been watching you work for the past 10 minutes. You handle that hoe like you were born with it in your hand." Hannah felt her defenses rise. "Is that so strange, Mr. Irwin? A woman who knows how to work the land," he chuckled, a warm sound that didn't hold the mockery she'd grown accustomed to. "Not strange at all, Miss Rhodes, just unexpected in these parts. My mother worked our farm back in Missouri alongside my father until the day she died. Never saw anyone with a greener thumb." Hannah relaxed slightly, leaning on her hoe. "Most folks around here think differently. Most folks don't know what it takes to coax life from the soil," he replied. "I heard those women talking as they passed by. Don't seem right, judging someone for honest work." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. "What brings you to my field, Mr. Irwin? Surely not to discuss my reputation in town." "Actually, I came to make a proposition." He gestured toward her potato plants. "I've got cattle to tend and fences to mend, but I could use some fresh vegetables. Thought maybe we could strike a deal. I help you with the heavy work. You share some of the harvest." Hannah studied him carefully. Men didn't offer help without expecting something in return, and she'd learned to be wary. "I manage just fine on my own." "No doubt," he said, "but 4 hands work faster than 2. I've got equipment, a plow horse that needs exercising, and I'm handy with irrigation. Could help you expand that field by spring." The prospect was tempting. With help, she could double her yield next season. Still, Hannah hesitated. Why would you bother? You've got 500 acres to worry about. Preston Irwin looked out over her modest field, then back at her. My daddy always said good neighbors are worth more than gold out here. Besides, I respect anyone who's not afraid of hard work. Before Hannah could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. 3 men rode up, led by Franklin Davis, the town's most prosperous merchant and a man who'd been pressuring Hannah to sell her land since her father's passing. Well, well, Davis called out, reining in his horse. Miss Rhodes found herself some help at last. He looked Preston up and down. You must be the new owner of the Douglas place. Davis is the name. I run the general store in town. Preston nodded but didn't offer his hand. Irwin, just introducing myself to my neighbor, Davis smirked. You'd be better off not wasting your time here. This little patch can barely support one person, let alone produce anything worth trading. He turned to Hannah. My offer still stands, Miss Rhodes. $500 for the whole property, more than generous considering. Hannah's grip tightened on her hoe. As I've told you before, Mr. Davis, this land is not for sale. Davis's friendly facade slipped. You're being foolish, girl. A woman alone can't make this work. Winter's coming, and when you can't make ends meet, my offer might not be so generous. Preston stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Hannah. Seems to me Miss Rhodes is doing just fine. Her potatoes look healthier than any I've seen in a while. Davis's eyes narrowed. You just arrived, Irwin. You don't know the situation here. I know enough, Preston replied evenly. I know good farmland when I see it, and I know when someone's trying to take advantage. The tension between the men was palpable. Davis finally broke the silence with a forced laugh. Just trying to help the girl out. Her father was a friend. I appreciate your concern, Hannah said, her tone making it clear she felt otherwise. But as I said, the farm stays in Rhodes' hands. Davis tipped his hat, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. Have it your way. But when you change your mind, you know where to find me. He turned his horse, motioning for his companions to follow. As they rode away, Hannah released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Thank you, Mr. Irwin, but I don't need a champion. Preston, he corrected. And I wasn't being a champion, just a neighbor. He looked at the retreating figures. That man's been bothering you long. Since a week after my father's funeral, Hannah admitted. He claims he wants to expand his cotton operations, but I think he's more interested in the water rights. We have a good well. Preston nodded thoughtfully. Makes sense. He surveyed the field again. So, about my proposition, Hannah considered the man before her. There was something straightforward about him that she found reassuring. Still, she had her pride. I can't pay you. Didn't ask for payment, he reminded her. Just a fair share of vegetables. Maybe some of those potatoes to start. After a moment, Hannah nodded. All right, Mr. Irwin Preston, we have a deal, he smiled, and Hannah felt something stir within her that she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The next morning, Hannah was already at work when she heard the now familiar sound of Preston's horse approaching. He arrived leading a second horse pulling a small plow. Morning, he called, tipping his hat. Thought we might break that new ground you mentioned yesterday. Hannah had been up since dawn, her mind racing with possibilities now that she had help. She had marked off an additional acre that could be cleared for planting come spring. You're serious about this, she said, surprised to see him so early and already prepared to work. I'm a man of my word, Miss Rhodes. Hannah, she corrected, echoing his words from yesterday. And yes, I can see that you are. They worked side by side throughout the morning, Preston handling the plow while Hannah cleared away stones and roots from the newly turned earth. By midday, they had made significant progress, and Hannah suggested a break. She brought out a jar of cool water from the well and some corn bread she'd baked the previous evening. They sat in the shade of an old oak tree at the edge of the field, the only sounds the distant lowing of cattle and the chirping of birds. "This is good," Preston said, savoring a bite of corn bread. "Been a while since I had home-baked anything." "It's the least I could do," Hannah replied. "You've done more work this morning than I could have managed in 3 days." Preston leaned back against the tree trunk. "Tell me about your farm. How long has it been in your family?" Hannah gazed out over the fields. "My father bought it 12 years ago after my mother died. We were in Ohio before that, but he couldn't bear to stay there without her, said we needed a fresh start." She picked at a blade of grass. "It was just the two of us until 6 months ago." "I'm sorry for your loss," Preston said quietly. "Thank you." Hannah looked at him. "What about you? What brings a Missouri farmer all the way to Arizona territory?" A shadow crossed Preston's face. "War took our farm, not during the fighting after. Taxes kept going up, and without my brothers to help, it got to be too much." He took another bite of corn bread. "Sold what was left and decided to try my hand at ranching instead. Heard the grazing was good out here." Hannah nodded, understanding loss all too well. "And your family?" "Parents gone. One brother didn't come back from the war. The other moved to California years ago." He offered a small smile. "Just me now." They fell into a comfortable silence, two people who understood what it meant to stand alone against the world. As the days turned into weeks, a routine developed. Preston would arrive early, often with tools or seeds or some improvement he thought might help the farm. They would work until midday, break for a simple meal, then continue until dusk threatened. Some days he would bring a portion of beef from a recently butchered steer, and Hannah would cook a proper dinner for them both. The townsfolk noticed, of course. Whispers followed Hannah when she went to town to sell her produce. Some were amused, others disapproving, but Hannah found she cared less and less what they thought. One Saturday in early October, Hannah was arranging her vegetables at the small market when Mildred Thompson and her circle approached. "Miss Rhodes," Mildred began, her voice dripping with false concern, "people are starting to talk about you and that cowboy spending so much time alone together." Hannah continued arranging her potatoes. "Mr. Irwin is my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, and a business partner of sorts." "Is that what they call it these days?" One of the other women snickered. Hannah straightened, meeting their gaze directly. "We're working the land together, nothing more." "A woman working fields like a common laborer," Mildred tusked. "And now with a man who isn't family. Your poor father would be turning in his grave." Hannah felt her temper flare. "My father taught me that honest work is nothing to be ashamed of, Mrs. Thompson. And Mr. Irwin has been nothing but respectful and helpful." "Helpful, I'm sure," another woman murmured, generating more snickers. "You ladies looking to buy some potatoes or just spreading gossip?" Preston's voice came from behind Hannah, causing her to turn in surprise. He stood with his arms crossed, his expression neutral but his eyes hard. Mildred had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Just concerned for a young woman alone in the world, Mr. Irwin. No need to take offense." "Concern would be offering help, not mockery," Preston replied evenly. He stepped forward and picked up several potatoes, examining them before placing them in a small sack. "I'll take these, Hannah. Best I've ever seen." The women watched in silence as he placed coins in Hannah's hand, tipped his hat to them, and walked away. "Well," Mildred said after a moment, "at least he calls you by your Christian name and not something more intimate." Hannah had had enough. "Mrs. Thompson, I have work to do. Unless you're buying something, I'd appreciate it if you'd move along." The women left in a flutter of indignation, but Hannah barely noticed. Her thoughts were on Preston and the way he'd come to her defense without making her seem weak. It was a balance few men knew how to strike. Later that afternoon, as they worked together clearing the last of the season's crops, Hannah brought up the incident. "Thank you for what you did at the market today." Preston glanced up from the furrow he was digging. "Didn't do much, just bought some potatoes." Hannah smiled. "We both know it was more than that." He straightened, wiping his brow with his sleeve. "People like that, they don't understand what it means to work for something, to build with your own hands." He looked out over the field they'd expanded together. "You've got nothing to be ashamed of." Hannah felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "Neither do you." Their eyes met, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. Then Preston cleared his throat and went back to his digging. "Been thinking," he said after a while. "That old chicken coop of yours could be fixed up. Few hens would give you eggs to sell come spring." And just like that, they were back on familiar ground, discussing the future of the farm as if it were the most natural thing in the world. As October gave way to November, the work changed from harvesting to preparing for winter. Preston helped Hannah repair the small barn and her cabin, ensuring both would withstand the cold months ahead. He taught her how to mend fences and build a proper irrigation system for the expanded fields. In turn, Hannah showed him how to preserve vegetables for the winter and make medicines from plants that grew wild on the property. They exchanged knowledge freely, each filling gaps in the other's experience. One evening, as they sat by the fire in Hannah's cabin after a long day of work, Preston broached a subject they'd been dancing around for weeks. "Hannah, I've been thinking about our arrangement." She looked up from the shirt she was mending, one of his that had torn during the day's work. "What about it?" Preston stared into the fire. "Winter's coming. There won't be much field work until spring." Hannah felt a strange panic rising within her. "There's still plenty to do. Planning for next year's crops, repairs to the well, I know," he interrupted gently. "But it won't be the same as working side by side every day." Hannah set down her mending. "What are you saying, Preston?" He met her gaze, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "I'm saying I've grown accustomed to seeing you every day, more than accustomed. I look forward to it." Hannah's heart quickened. "I do too." Preston leaned forward. "The thing is, Hannah, I think what's between us is more than just neighboring or business. At least for me it is." Hannah had known this conversation was coming, had felt the change between them as autumn deepened. What had started as a simple arrangement had grown into something neither had anticipated. "For me as well," she admitted softly. Relief washed over his features. "I know it hasn't been long, but out here, people don't always have the luxury of taking things slow." He reached across and took her hand. "I'd like your permission to court you properly, Hannah Rhodes." Hannah looked down at their joined hands, both calloused from hard work, both strong. "What would that look like, Preston Irwin? I'm not about to stop working my fields." He smiled. "I wouldn't expect you to, and I wouldn't want you to." He squeezed her hand gently. "It would look like this, us working together, building something together, just with the understanding that we're heading somewhere." "And where is that?" Hannah asked, though she already knew the answer. "Wherever we decide," Preston replied, "but I hope it's toward a shared life." Hannah felt years of loneliness and struggle melt away at his words. "I'd like that very much." The first snow of winter fell 3 weeks later, blanketing the land in white. Hannah stood at her cabin window, watching the flakes drift down and thinking about how much had changed in the months since Preston Irwin had ridden onto her farm. A knock at the door broke her reverie. She opened it to find Preston, his hat and shoulders dusted with snow, a small pine tree in his arms. "Thought you might like some Christmas cheer," he said, stomping his boots before stepping inside. Hannah laughed. "It's only the first week of December." "Early bird gets the best tree," he replied, setting it in the corner. "Besides, I wanted an excuse to see you today." Since their conversation by the fire, Preston had been true to his word about courting her properly. He'd taken her to church in town, escorted her to the harvest social, and come calling regularly with small gifts, a book, a ribbon for her hair, seeds for next year's garden. The townspeople had adjusted to seeing them together, though the gossip hadn't entirely ceased. Franklin Davis, in particular, made no secret of his displeasure, especially after Hannah had formally rejected his offer to buy her land. "You're looking at me strangely," Preston said, interrupting her thoughts. "Something wrong?" Hannah shook her head. "Just thinking about how different things are from last winter. I was alone, worried about the future. Now, he prompted, moving closer. "Now I have hope," she finished. "And you?" He reached out to touch her cheek. "You've always had more strength than you realize, Hannah. That's what drew me to you from the start, watching you work that field alone, standing up to Davis and those gossiping women." Hannah leaned into his touch. "I was just doing what needed to be done." "That's what I mean," Preston said softly. "You don't even see how remarkable you are." He leaned down and kissed her, a gentle touch that deepened as Hannah responded. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "I should probably go," Preston murmured, though he made no move to leave. "Stay for dinner," Hannah invited. "I've got a stew on the stove." He smiled. "How can I refuse an offer like that?" As they ate, they talked about the future, the crops they would plant in spring, improvements to both their properties, the possibility of Hannah raising sheep alongside Preston's cattle. "We could combine our operations," Preston suggested. "Your vegetables, my beef, maybe some wool and mutton. We'd have a diverse offering." Hannah nodded thoughtfully. "It makes sense. We'd be stronger together than apart." Preston set down his spoon. "That's true of more than just our farms, Hannah." She met his gaze. "I know." Later, as Preston prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "There's a Christmas dance in town next Saturday. Would you go with me?" Hannah hesitated. Public gatherings still made her uncomfortable, aware as she was of the judgment that often followed her. "Davis and his friends will be there," she said. "So will we," Preston replied. "Together." The word gave her courage. "All right then, together." The town hall was decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons when Hannah and Preston arrived for the Christmas dance. Lanterns cast a warm glow over the proceedings, and a small band played in the corner. Hannah had worn her best dress, a blue calico she'd saved for special occasions, and Preston had arrived in a clean shirt and vest, his usually unruly hair slicked back. "You look beautiful," he'd told her when he'd come to escort her, and the admiration in his eyes had made her blush like a schoolgirl. Now, as they entered the hall, several heads turned their way. Hannah felt the familiar scrutiny but drew strength from Preston's hand at the small of her back. "Miss Rhodes," Pastor Williams greeted them. "Mr. Irwin, glad you could join us tonight." "Wouldn't miss it, Pastor," Preston replied, shaking the man's hand. "The Lord blesses those who work the land," the pastor said, nodding to Hannah. "Your father would be proud to see how you've maintained his farm." The simple acknowledgement nearly brought tears to Hannah's eyes. "Thank you, Pastor. That means a great deal." They moved further into the room, accepting cups of punch from a table near the wall. The music changed to a lively reel and Preston set down his cup. "Would you care to dance?" he asked, extending his hand. Hannah hesitated. "I'm not very practiced." "Neither am I," he admitted with a grin. "We'll learn together." And so they did, laughing as they stumbled through the steps, gradually finding their rhythm. By the third dance, Hannah had forgotten to be self-conscious, caught up in the joy of the music and Preston's unwavering attention. During a break in the dancing, Mildred Thompson approached, her expression unreadable. "Miss Rhodes," she said, nodding slightly. "Mr. Irwin." Mrs. Thompson, Hannah replied cautiously. I must say your farm is looking quite impressive these days, Mildred continued. Those new fences are particularly sturdy. Hannah blinked in surprise at the unexpected compliment. Thank you. Preston helped design them. Well, it seems you two make quite the team. Mildred glanced between them. Perhaps I was hasty in my previous judgments. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was more than Hannah had ever expected from the woman. We all make judgments from time to time, Mrs. Thompson. Mildred nodded, seemingly satisfied with the diplomatic response. Enjoy the rest of the evening. She moved away, rejoining her husband across the room. Well, that was unexpected, Preston murmured. Hannah smiled. People can surprise you. Speaking of surprises, he said, taking her hand. Would you step outside with me for a moment? There's something I'd like to discuss. Curious, Hannah followed him onto the porch of the town hall. The night was clear and cold, stars glittering above them like diamonds scattered across black velvet. Their breath formed small clouds in the crisp air. Preston led her to a quiet corner, away from the few other couples seeking respite from the warmth inside. Hannah, he began, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. These past months have been the happiest of my life. Her heart began to race. Mine too. He took both her hands in his. When I first saw you working that field alone, I admired your determination. As I got to know you, that admiration grew into respect, then affection, and now. He paused, taking a deep breath. Now I know it's love. Hannah felt tears spring to her eyes. Preston, let me finish, he said gently. I know it hasn't been long by some standards, but out here, life doesn't wait. Every day with you confirms what I knew almost from the start. You're the woman I want to build a life with. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring, a simple gold band with a small pearl set in the center. It was my mother's, he explained. Hannah Rhodes, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, of joining our lands and our lives? Hannah looked at the man before her, strong, kind, who had seen value in her when others saw only a woman out of place, who had said in not so many words that if they mocked her for working the fields, then he would harvest beside her. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Preston Irwin. I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left no doubt about his feelings. When they finally broke apart, Hannah was laughing through her tears. What will people say? The woman who works the fields marrying after such a short acquaintance, Preston grinned. They'll say you found a man who appreciates a woman who knows the value of hard work, and they'll be right. The sound of the door opening caused them to step apart. Franklin Davis emerged, his face darkening when he saw them. Celebrating something? He asked, noting their clasped hands. As a matter of fact, we are, Preston replied evenly. Miss Rhodes has just agreed to become my wife. Davis's eyes narrowed. Congratulations, he said flatly. I suppose this means that land of yours will be even less likely to come on the market. Hannah lifted her chin. Mr. Davis, let me be clear. The Rhodes farm, soon to be the Rhodes Irwin farm, will never be for sale to you. Not now, not ever. Davis's face flushed with anger. You're making a mistake, both of you. The only mistake would be letting go of something precious, Preston replied, and we've no intention of doing that. Davis muttered something under his breath and stalked away, disappearing around the corner of the building. He'll cause trouble, Hannah said worriedly. Preston squeezed her hand. Let him try. We're stronger together, remember? They returned to the dance, their news spreading quickly through the hall. To Hannah's surprise, the reaction was largely positive congratulations, well wishes, even a few knowing smiles from older couples who had perhaps recognized the signs before they had themselves. Pastor Williams agreed to marry them the following Sunday, seeing no reason for delay when both were so certain of their choice. The wedding was simple but joyful. Hannah wore a cream-colored dress she had made herself, with wildflowers in her hair. Preston stood tall in a new shirt and vest, his face alight with happiness as she walked toward him in the small church. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Williams began, his voice filling the modest space, "we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Hannah barely heard the familiar words, lost in Preston's steady gaze. This man who had seen her strength rather than her vulnerability, who had worked beside her instead of trying to change her. When the time came to speak their vows, Preston's voice rang clear and confident. "I, Preston Irwin, take you, Hannah Rhodes, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love and cherish you, to honor and respect you, to work beside you in all seasons of our life together. What God has blessed, let no man tear asunder." Hannah's voice trembled slightly as she repeated the traditional words, adding her own promise. "I will stand with you as we build our life together, through harvest and planting, through plenty and want. By the power vested in me," Pastor Williams concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Preston leaned down, his lips meeting hers in a tender kiss that held all the promise of their future together. The small reception was held at Hannah's, now their cabin. Neighbors brought food and good wishes, staying until the sun began to set. As the last guests departed, Preston and Hannah stood on the porch, his arm around her waist, watching the golden light fade from the fields they had worked together. "Mrs. Irwin," he said, testing the sound of her new name. Hannah smiled up at him. "Mr. Irwin." "What are you thinking?" he asked, noting the thoughtful expression on her face. "I'm thinking about the day you rode up and found me working my potato field, about how everything changed from that moment." Preston nodded. "I remember thinking you were the bravest woman I'd ever seen, standing up to those gossips and working land that would challenge any man." "And now," Hannah asked, "now I know you're also the strongest, kindest, most determined woman I've ever known." He kissed the top of her head. "And I'm the luckiest man in the Arizona Territory to call you my wife." Hannah leaned against him, feeling the solid strength of the man who had chosen to stand beside her rather than try to change her. "We've got the spring planting to plan," she murmured. "The new fields will need to be prepared," Preston chuckled. "Already thinking about work, Mrs. Irwin, always," she admitted with a smile. "But now I'm thinking about our work, our land, our future. Our children someday," Preston added softly, "teaching them to value the land as we do." The thought filled Hannah with a deep contentment. "Sons and daughters who won't be afraid to work beside us in the fields, and who will never mock others for doing honest work," Preston agreed. As night fell over the land they both loved, Hannah Rhodes Irwin stood in the circle of her husband's arms, looking out at the fields that had once been her burden and were now their shared blessing. The path ahead would not always be easy. There would be drought years and bountiful harvests, struggles and triumphs, but they would face them together, side by side, just as they would always harvest together.